Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for taking time to join today's talk. Before I start my talk, I would like to thank the organizers for their kind invitation. My name is Choon-guan, and I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist from the Institute of Mental Health in Singapore. Today, I'm going to share with you our journey in the development of a brain-computer interface-based attention training program for ADHD. First, I would like to declare that I have no financial conflict of interest to declare. The patent for this product has been filed by the institutions involved, and I do not receive any financial gains from this. The technology has also been licensed to Neuro, and I do not receive any funding support from them. Now I'd like to start by giving a little background information about ADHD and why we decided to embark on this journey. ADHD is the short form for a condition called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is a condition of onset in childhood, and it runs a chronic course. As the name implies, there are two groups of symptoms: inattentive symptoms and hyperactive impulsive symptoms. The inattentive symptoms are more persistent, and when the condition persists into adulthood, the adults tend to be more affected by the inattentive symptoms. This condition is highly prevalent, affecting about 5% of children worldwide. It results in academic and occupational underachievement in these young people. And during young adulthood, studies have shown that it is associated with higher rates of motor accidents. And over their lifetime, they tend to have more relational problems. As a result, this condition is associated with relatively high burden. The current evidence-based treatment for ADHD includes both medication as well as psychosocial treatment. Medications are often not the preferred first choice of treatment by parents because they are concerned about the side effects, particularly the effects on growth. Also, medication does not teach the child skills to cope with their symptoms. It controls the symptoms, but it does not cure the condition. For psychosocial treatment, most of the strategies involve behavioral treatment. Because behavioral treatment requires many sessions over time and also intensive collaborative treatment with the school personnel and family members, particularly the parents, it is highly manpower intensive and takes time to see results. Because of these limitations, we decided that there is a need to explore alternative treatments for ADHD. If we look at the pathophysiology and also the phenotypical characteristics of the condition, the other areas which we can target include the executive functions, for which cognitive training is possible, as well as abnormal EEG. In ADHD, there were studies that have shown that these children tend to have relatively higher proportion of slow waves, particularly theta and delta waves, for example. Neurofeedback therapy has been developed to train the individual to suppress these slow waves. However, neurotherapy requires the young person, the subject, to actually have these abnormalities in the first place before they can embark on treatment. The treatment is also very specific to suppress specific waves. Therefore, it may not be suitable for every child. The therapist will also need to be trained. In BCI, we use EEG as the interface between the subject and the computer itself. So the EEG waves are passed through various filter banks to actually expand into the more a wider array of subbands, which will then provide much more information for the brain-computer interface to analyze the information. The subjects are put through various activities, including eye-opening, eye-closed states, so as to help to calibrate their EEG patterns during their inattentive states and attentive states. For our attention training program, we also additionally include the color stroke task as one of the calibration tasks. So during calibration, the individual goes through these various activities, including eye-opening, closing, and color stroke tasks. And the information is fed into the BCI system, which then extracts the EEG information to build a model of their attention state. This information is then used to drive the game. In our very first trial, which was conducted in the clinic, the subject will put on a full EEG cap. We used relatively simple games. So we published the results of our first pilot trial, which included 10 pairs of children, which means 20 children in total, aged 7 to 12 with ADHD, who have never received treatment with medication. Like most clinical samples, we have a predominantly male sample for the study. The treatment intensity was twice a week for a total of 10 weeks. So 10 children will be in the intervention group versus 10 in the control group. The control group did not receive any treatment during these 10 weeks. So we measured their ADHD symptoms using the ADHD rating scale at 5 weeks, as well as at 10 weeks. And what we found from our first study was that at 10 weeks, there was significant change in their inattentive symptoms in the intervention group compared to the control group. At 5 weeks, there was actually no improvement. So this suggests to us that a minimum of 10 weeks of training with a total of 20 sessions was needed to see an improvement. The ratings were improved both in the parents rated ADHD rating scale as well as the teacher rated ADHD rating scale. The teachers were blinded to their treatment allocation group. So we felt that the teachers' ratings represented a better blinded assessment of their symptoms. And because of this, we proceeded further with a second study to improve on our games and also to explore if we could develop a different headset. So the new game was called Kogoland. I will show you a video later on in the presentation. We also developed the program using dry sensors. So instead of having to have a full EEG cap, which is really quite messy to put on, we used available sensors in the market, which included 2 frontal electrodes. So it could be worn on a simple headband. And we found that with these 2 electrodes, we could actually still gather sufficient information to run the attention program. This was a major first step towards our eventual goal of developing a home-based treatment program. So we tested out in this trial to see if the program would work similarly as our first trial. We adjusted the program in our second trial. So our challenge in the first trial was that over a period of 10 weeks, it was difficult towards the end because the treatment duration was too long. So we shortened it to about 8 weeks, but increased the intensity to 3 times a week. So therefore, a total of 24 sessions over 8 weeks. We also wanted to test whether booster training after this intensive training period would be helpful. So we included a monthly booster session for a total of 3 months after they have completed the 8-week treatment. And we found that their inattentive symptoms improved after 8 weeks of treatment. And during the subsequent 3 months of maintenance treatment, it helped to sustain the improvement gain, although we did not see further improvements. And so we proceeded with a randomized controlled trial using the current setup. Let me show you the video about how the intervention works. This is a video showing our recruitment.
Brain-computer interface, or BCI, is a computer program designed to help children with ADHD, predominantly inattentive symptoms. The intervention takes place over a period of 5 months. There will be 3 sessions per week for the first 8 weeks. Subsequently, there will be 3 monthly booster sessions.
First, put on the headband. Second, choose your avatar. Third, concentrate to make your avatar run. It's that easy.
In the basic stage, the bird will run in a fixed route. Time will be recorded for 3 laps. Better time equals better concentration. The goal is to make the bird run as fast as possible. In the intermediate stage, the bird has to run and jump to collect specific fruit. In the advanced stage, the bird has to run and jump and collect fruits in a specific order.
The BCI headband captures real-time brainwave activity. This information is transmitted via wireless technology to the computer, which reflects the child's concentration level. This determines the speed of the bird.
Parents are usually concerned about their child's performance in school. In order to address this, an MCQ questionnaire will be administered every alternate session. This is to help the child generalize concentration skills to academics.
For more information, contact any of our friendly research staff. Come aboard our BCI program now.
For this trial, we randomized 172 children into the intervention group as well as the control group. The intervention group will receive 24 sessions of BCI training over 8 weeks, followed by a monthly booster for 3 months. The control group will have a wait time of 8 weeks before receiving similar treatment. So the primary outcome was the ADHD rating scale at 8 weeks. So this shows you the characteristics of both groups. Again, we have children who are predominantly male and Chinese. This is rather representative of our ethnic makeup in Singapore. Now, looking at the primary outcome at 8 weeks, the inattentive symptoms in the intervention group compared to the waitlist control group actually showed significant improvement in their inattentive symptoms with a small to moderate effect size of 0.38. And we look at their improvement of symptoms over time, right? Similarly to what we found in the first trial, there was improvement after 8 weeks of intensive treatment. And during the maintenance phase, maintenance training phase, we did not see additional gains, right? But interestingly, 1 month later, there was actually further improvements in their inattentive symptoms. A sub-study from this randomized controlled trial was a neuroimaging study. This is to help us to understand the mechanism through which our intervention works. So for this study, we have a group of children who received intervention undergo resting state imaging and compared this with a group of children from the waitlist control group, during which they did not receive any intervention. The MRI scans were done at baseline and then at 8 weeks after they have completed treatment. So we have 18 children who acquired adequate images for analysis in the intervention group, compared with 11 from the non-intervention group, from the waitlist controls. So the results showed that the intervention resulted in the greatest change in the salience ventral attention network. This network has a central role in the detection of behaviorally relevant stimuli, integrating information, and in mediating information flow between other networks in the higher order cognition. So overall, the changes suggested that the BCI attention training program renormalized the salience network and improved the efficiency of coordination between the salience ventral attention network and the dorsal attention network. So comes our final phase in the development of a home-based treatment. We really wanted to move the treatment and the intervention to the patient's own home instead of relying on the already strained clinic services. Right? So this is our latest trial. We have developed the intervention onto a tablet form. So for the trial, we recruited 20 children, again, a predominantly male sample, and randomized them to a home-based treatment group versus a clinic-based treatment group. For this trial, we only tested out the 8 weeks of intensive training because we wanted to try out if this home-based therapy is feasible. So this picture shows you how our current tablet-based training works. Again, this headset is developed by Neuro, and the treatment is now on a small tablet, right? So you can see that the subject has to press on certain controls to jump to catch the fruit. But otherwise, most of the intervention is through their concentration. So these results have yet to be published, and it is currently under review by a journal. So what we have shown was that both the home-based group and the clinic groups could complete the interventions. So even without much supervision for the home-based group from our therapists, right? So what it shows is that we could actually have this intervention in the patient's own home, and they could actually go through the intervention on a tablet without much problem. Most of them were able to complete all 24 sessions over the 8 weeks period. And there was not much significant adverse effects. So compared to our earlier trials with headbands, we actually had a few young persons complain of headaches and giddiness. But on this trial, we did not see such complaints. In terms of the ratings, what we have found was that based on the clinician-rated inattention score, there was significant improvement in their inattentive symptoms in both groups. So the efficacy of the treatment was sustained on this tablet form of the training program. So in terms of the future directions, now that we have shown that the tablet-based version of our attention training program could be delivered in the home setting, we can actually examine further training schedules. For example, will a longer training program actually result in greater improvement? We can also investigate the effects of a longer maintenance training. We have also explored the use of attention training program in other psychiatric conditions. In many psychiatric conditions, attention is affected, including anxiety disorders and even dementia in the elderly. We have current trials ongoing to incorporate the use of various technologies as well. So for example, incorporating a virtual reality game in the treatment of anxiety disorders. We have also done a small pilot trial to investigate the efficacy of this training program for children with both comorbid ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, and incorporating the eye tracking device in the development of additional training activities. So there is a lot of scope for further research of this technology. So with this, I end my talk here. Thank you very much. And I have to acknowledge the entire team behind this 15-year journey working on this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lim, for your sharing. So let's go to answer some questions from our online audience. So here comes the first one. Would the BCI technology affect the user's sleep? I believe it's from a parent. What do you think?
Okay, hello. Yeah, thanks for this question. During our trials, we have collected a variety of potential, effects on the young person, and thankfully, we haven't, had any of our almost 200 patients or young persons report any sleep-related problems. Unfortunately, because we were capturing side effects, we didn't capture any potential benefits in sleep as well. Thank you very much for this. Perhaps in our future research, this could be one area we can kind of explore, in terms of assessing if sleep may actually improve.
That's good to know. So another audience asked, could the BCI technology be used to prevent dementia?
We have, okay, this is actually not my study. We have another group exploring its use in mild cognitive impairment. So this is like a pre-dementia stage. And I think they have published one study, one pilot study to suggest that their intervention, which involves a lot of games involving working memory, can actually, improve or rather slow down the speed of decline in mild cognitive impairment. I don't think that they have gone into dementia treatment proper, but probably we're looking at early intervention further upstream.
Thank you. Here asks, how's the effectiveness of this program in hyperactivity symptoms?
We have actually found improvements in the hyperactivity symptoms as well, although this was not something that we had expected. During our randomized controlled trials, the improvements was almost to a level similar, to the inattentive symptoms. So we're not sure if this could be related to, the brain circuit network improvements, or was it because of the structure of the program, which also provides some, behavioral, rewards towards improving their hyperactivity level. So, primarily we were targeting the attention in ADHD.
Right, thank you. Okay, here is an interesting one. For the future directions on the treatment schedule, will you consider to include different games in one same session in order to have a more significant effect? What do you think, Dr. Lim?
Yeah, in fact, one of our challenges was actually designing a game that will be engaging. This was something indeed that we were thinking about, because the games that we have now will attract, will probably be attractive to the young person. So that's why we targeted 6 to 12. These games are probably not engaging for the teenagers. And also, after a period of time, the young person may start to get bored. Indeed, you are right. We hope that we can have a variety of games, so that we can actually look into extending, right, the entire treatment duration, and be able to still engage the young person, and also to be able to attract and engage a wider age range of young persons with ADHD.
Thank you, Dr. Lim. There's another one, more technical one maybe. He asked about the control experiment group's baseline differed in study 1. So he asked, how was this controlled with respect to change measurement? What do you think, Dr. Lim?
I'm not sure though at the baseline, which I'm afraid that I cannot remember the exact details in my first study. So the first study was actually to help us determine, like I said, the training schedule. At which point that means that will 20 sessions be enough? Too little? When can we expect changes? So I agree that the first study, our main outcome was not really to establish the efficacy per se. So there may be, and also because the numbers were small, so it's more likely that there may be some differences between the controls and intervention group. And that was why it was very important. This was to help us gather some initial data in order to plan for the randomized control trial. So if you're interested in looking at the efficacy, I think it'd be more important to focus on the randomized control trial.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Lim, for your sharing.
Thank you, organizers, for the invitation. I'm Supèr. I'm a neurobiologist, and I'm co-founder of Braingaze. Braingaze's vision is to bring mental health care into the new era of digital tools. We make and develop digital biomarkers and therapy based on digital tools as well. So we focus on two main mental health disorders. One is ADHD, the attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, mainly occurring in kids, but also it continues in half of cases. It continues into adulthood. Currently at 12 million diagnosed, but still there are especially adults that are undiagnosed, and there is a lot of misdiagnosis in the space. Besides ADHD, we also do Alzheimer's disease. That's the other main mental health concern. This occurs, of course, mainly in elderly above 60 years of age. Currently, are 50 million people diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and this is believed to increase because of the aging population worldwide. So how we do this? Braingaze exploits, let's say, the visual system. We know that these mental disorders, ADHD and also Alzheimer's, but also other mental disorders, occurring or are, let's say, are believed to be a problem of structures in the midbrain and brainstem. These are critical. We also know that these areas control eye movements. Our eyes always move, and they are directly controlled by the brainstem structures that are also then again are influenced by let's say the highest structures, frontal cortex, parietal cortex. So by measuring eye movement, we can know the functionality of these areas in the brainstem. Besides measuring or assessing the functionality of brainstem structures, we also measure them and activate them. We know that the retina, the eye, let's say, directly connects to brainstem structures and then also activates them. So by making eye movements, we activate these areas, and as you will later see in my talk, thereby we also can improve, let's say, at least cognitive behavior in patients. So we look at eye movements, but we don't look at any. There are several eye movements. We don't look at all of the eye movement types. We look at a specific one. That's an eye movement that is called convergence. We discovered a couple of years ago that there is a new role of convergence in cognitive processing. That's why we call it cognitive convergence. Convergence is the eye of both eyes, but in the opposite direction. You can see here, let's say in red, the angle of the gaze vector of the eye. If you look at the stimulus, what your eyes do is they go a little bit inward, so the eyes point a little bit towards the nose, thereby increasing this angle. And this eye movement, this convergence eye movement, is necessary for you to see the stimulus where you're looking at, memorize it, to pay attention to this stimulus. So what we do is to measure this specific small eye movement during gaze fixation, and we measure the change in the angle to record, measure convergence. We did a lot of scientific research that has been published in several journals, scientific journals. All the traces that you see here in these three figures, there are these changes of this angle that I just told you about. There's the convergence angle, and as you can see, if you look at these are all gaze fixation at the center of the screen, but they have to do a task, or they have to attend to a stimulus, or they have to see the stimulus, or they have to memorize it. Every time you see that the traces, they are not stable, they are not flat, they just modulate over time, and this modulation over time indicates whether, let's say for the first one, you can see there's a huge increase when you attend to the stimulus. So there's a relatively strong convergent eye movement when you attend to the stimulus. If you don't attend to the stimulus, you don't have convergent eye movement. Important to say, it's not a result of attention, it causes you to attend to the stimulus. So it's a causal problem. Similar, if you look to the middle figure, we see that the stimuli, if you look at a stimulus, sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't see it. If you see it, it's because you have made this convergent eye movement when you're looking at this stimulus. If you did not see it, it's because you did not have this eye convergence while looking at this stimulus. Of course, if you see a stimulus or not depends on the saliency of the stimulus. High salient gives strongest probability of seeing it, so and also stronger convergence eye movement than low salient stimuli. An interesting case is the blue one, that is a near threshold stimulus, so sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't see it. If you see the stimulus, you have a convergent eye movement. If you don't see it, you don't have this convergent eye movement. So it really depends on your convergent eye movement, not on the stimulus, the contrast on the stimulus. It depends on the convergent eye movement, whether you will see consciously. And the same for memory. We have, if you have to memorize the stimulus that you have seen for a short period, then if you have to recall it again, if you were able to recall the stimulus because you have memorized it, then you have a strong convergent response, that's the red trace. If you have forgotten the stimulus, you will have a lower convergent response and a weaker convergent response. That's why you have forgotten. Again, all these studies have been published, and they're still currently carrying out these type of basic research studies. Another study shows that convergence also correlates very nicely with neural activity, and especially neural activity, late neural activity that relates to attention and to processing of sensory stimulus. In the right side, we see the blue curve that is outwards response, so when the eyes move a little bit inward while looking or attending to stimulus. And while making this convergent eye movement, we see also that there is a late ADHD response in the brain in the right cortex. And if this is a strong vergent eye movement, the activity is strong, and if it is weaker, then the neural activity is low. So there's a nice correlation in behavior and also neural activity with vergent eye movements. This methodology has been patented by Braingaze worldwide, so every use case that uses this vergence to detect and measure vergence has been protected by us. So one of the first, let's say, more clinical studies what we did is to look at ADHD, because we know one side vergence has a role in attention, and we know that kids and elderly adults with ADHD, they have problems with attention. So we want to know whether these kids have altered or distorted vergence response. So we did a clinical validation study that has been adapted based on our scientific task. So we have, let's say, more friendly, child-friendly task. We have here in the left at the fixation, you have a frog that has closed in her eyes. And then we have two conditions. We have a cue condition and no cue condition. So the cue condition is that the frog looks to the left and right to the pound where the tadpole will appear for a fish. By looking at one of these pounds, then the child knows that it will appear at that side, and therefore it's a cue. So the child knows I have to attend to the left or to the right side. In the non-informative, let's say, the non-cue condition, the frog looks straight ahead, so it doesn't give any indication where this tadpole or fish will appear with the side. Then there will be a fish or a tadpole. The tadpole is the target, the fish is the distractor. So if there's a tadpole, you have to press. So that's the task. But the important thing is that when there's a cue or no cue, whether you attend to one of the sides or whether you have vergence eye movement or not, versus, let's say, the no cue condition where you don't shift your attention, which you don't have any cue where it will disappear. So there will be a less modulation. Eye vergence, that's what we hope to see. Then if you look at the data, so we see again three plots with two curves. Each curve depicts the eye vergence, the angle of eye vergence, the modulation of eye vergence over time in the different periods. So we have the first period called fixation. So there's a fixation, we see a modulation over time. Then we see in the cue period, it's small, but the blue trace is a little bit higher than the red trace, so indicating there's a stronger convergence where you attend to the stimulus, whereas you don't attend to the stimulus before. And then in the stimulus period where you see the fish or a tadpole, you see a strong, let's say, decrease, a strong divergence when the eyes move a little bit outward to this stimulus. So there's a nice modulation over time, but this happens in control, so in healthy cognitive and healthy children. If you look at clinical controls, there are children that have attention problems, but are otherwise, I have not been diagnosed with ADHD and other problems. We see again a nice modulation. We see a little bit stronger cue than no cue vergence, and we see some kind of modulation in the stimulus period. But if you look at the ADHD, we see a flat line, so there's no modulation and there is no difference in vergence between them. If you use this data with machine learning, what we see, we can classify these ADHD children based on this vergence responses. We get a very nice classification of 92% with a very quite low false positive and negative. So we can, based on a task, a 10 minutes task, recording the vergence, we can classify whether a patient has ADHD or not. We have done the same thing also in adults. You see again two approach. One is the cue and the other one is the no cue, the non-informative cue. The gray traces are the ADHD patients, the adult patients. The black one are the healthy or the clinical controls ones. We see in the clinical controls, we see that there's a small bump, let's say, in cognitive divergence where you present the cue, and there's, let's say, a general decline. So there is modulation. Clinical controls, we don't, again, in the healthy, ADHD adult, we don't see so much modulation in cognitive divergence. So again, if we do classifiers with machine learning models, we can classify them almost 80% correct, a little bit less children, but still fairly good. We extended this to this method of detection based on divergence, digital biomarker, call it, to patients with MCI, mild cognitive impairment, and Alzheimer. We use a different task. It's a thoughtful task, so it's on the left side. So this would be each square is, let's say, represents the screen. There are blue letters appearing on the screen every 2 seconds, and occasionally the letters are red, and that's the thoughtful, and then you have to press a key. It takes 5 minutes, could be even shorter, but 5 minutes is enough. And while doing this task, we measure the eye movements. We do this with an infrared tracker. That's shown on the right side of the upper panel. And lower panel, you see the setup. It's just a laptop with the infrared camera. And in the middle panels, you see the burden responses to healthy MCI and Alzheimer patients. You see that they quite are different. And again, if we use machine learning to classify them, we can again above 90% with accuracy get whether the patient has MCI or Alzheimer. So that's about our diagnostics tools. We extended this to digital, what we call digital therapy. If you know that the eye movements have a role, are actually critical in cognitive performance. If you know that eye movements activate these structures in the midbrain, can we, let's say, activate them and thereby improving cognitive behavior? So what we did is first in ADHD, we have several tasks, and these tasks are controlled by your eyes, not with the keyboard, joystick, or gate. So what we do here is we evaluate, we assess these children with different tests before entering into intervention to assess their symptoms and the level of attention. Then we have the intervention itself. There's 3 weeks of gameplay. We have 2 groups. We have the experimental group and control group. The experimental group plays the game with the eyes. So it's, let's say, an attention game. And you control it with your eyes. Whereas the control group controls it with a mouse. And thereafter, we again assess their attention level and their behavior to see whether there was an improvement or not. And it was the first pilot participated with the ADHD patients, so everybody ADHD. And what we see is that we see that in the experimental group, so the group that played the game with the eyes, we see that they improved their oculomotor behavior, so they're better in fixating, so there were less saccades. So they had before entering the game play, they had higher number of saccades than afterwards. In the mouse control group, there was no improvement. We also see improvement in detection rate. So this is the before treatment, this is after treatment, and we see that there is a reduction in reaction time. So they are faster in responding, but they are also better in responding to improved accuracy. And we don't see this improvement in control in another task. So there is an improvement in oculomotor behavior, and there's also an improvement in detection rate. reaction time. We looked, this is still unpublished data, so it's also pilot data. We looked at, okay, if we have this improvement in behavior in these kids using this therapy, do we also see this improvement at the level of oculomotor structure, so at the level of our eye movement? So if we look at our, let's say we call it treatment, we see that there is an increase in the virgin response in the experimental group, but not in the control group. We see the same in pupil. Pupil is triggered by the virgins, and pupil has a role also in attention in general. We also see that there is an improvement in the experimental group, but we don't see this in control group. And if we look at the literature and we look at what is also our own pilot data, we see we have kids that were naive and received after the diagnosis treatment, medical treatment, pharmaceutical treatment, and we see the similar result. So we see that children that receive pharmaceutical treatment increased virgin responses, and not in the control group, and also in the. So our discipline treatment improves at a cognitive level, but also at eye level, and similarities to medical treatments. So what we do is we assess the critical structures in these brain disorders. We don't do this with drugs, but we do this with eye activating brain connection. We have now, because we use an infrared eye tracker, we have developed also a webcam or self-cam eye tracker, so we can have games played on a tablet or a smartphone. We did the same study also with elderly, with Alzheimer's patients. They did also an intervention with eye tracking games. We tested them before and after with a battery of the test. We see that that's on the left side, we see that there is a significant improvement in memory. And we also see that there is a significant improvement in the MOCA scores. That is a screening test, as Montreal assessment, screening scores for assessing MCI. So besides ADHD, also this therapy seems to improve the cognitive behavior of patients. Of course, we don't do this alone. This is the last slide. We collaborate with a lot of universities and hospitals across Europe and also in the States, and we all publish our data. And then my time is up, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Supèr, for your sharing. So let's look into the questions from our audience. So the first one is about, is there any difference between ADHD and dementia people using the interactive eye tracking games? So what's your observation, Dr. Supèr?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the eye tracking game that we used for ADHD and as well for Alzheimer's patients is the same. This was for us, it was the first pilot to study whether you can, with interactive eye tracking games, whether you can promote, let's say, cognitive behavior. So we used an eye tracking game that induces, let's say, this cognitive urgent eye movement, and thereby hopefully improving your cognitive behavior. And we see in both mental disorders, ADHD and Alzheimer's, we see cognitive improvements using the same game, because actually we target the same mechanisms. So the game in itself is not that important, let's say.
Thank you. So the next question is about, okay, so how long does it usually take for a course of treatment to be effective? And what would be the indication? What do you think, Dr. Supèr?
Yeah, so in our first studies, what we did with the ADHD kids was 3 weeks. They played a couple of times, 3 times a week. for 15 minutes. After 3 weeks playing, we saw improvements in their attention behavior. We did in Alzheimer's patients, we did a little bit, we did 2 weeks, a little bit more intensive, so every day. And we saw after 2 weeks, we also already saw some improvements. I think to have, let's say, a consistent improvement, I think it's necessary to continue playing these games for a longer time. It's like in going to the gym. If you go to the gym, you will get a better shape. But if you leave going to the gym, if you don't go anymore, then eventually you lose everything that you have gained while doing these sports. So here's the same. If you continue playing these games, then you will improve your cognitive, your attention behavior. If you leave it, then probably you go back again.
That's so true.
And how we can see this. Sorry. And the indicators. What we did is just a battery of cognitive tests to see memory, attention, perception, and we see attention improvement in ADHD. We see memory improvements in Alzheimer's patients. So, but in general, all cognitive behavior will be improved. That's the idea.
That's so true about like doing gym, right? We need to keep doing it. So
exactly.
Right. So before you go, we have another interesting question. The participant asks, is this game only available in Android? And is there any technical limitation in using it?
Well, it's now on Google Play Store, our first game. We have for the iOS, for the Apple one, we have a beta version in test flight. So yeah, if people are interested, they can send me an email requesting access to this game. So for now, I think most of the Android mobile phones are suitable to play this game. I think it also depends on the quality of the camera. So because we use the selfie camera to detect the eyes. A higher end mobile phone probably will perform better than a lower end one, but I think all mobile phones after, I guess it was after 2014, they should be suitable for this game. And as I said, for the iOS, for the Apple's one, yeah, you can send me an email and I can send you a link to the test flight for doing the beta version testing.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Dr. Supèr, for having you with us today.
Hi, my name is Dr. Randy Kulman, and I'm happy to be speaking today about video games as a treatment for ADHD. I have been a child clinical psychologist for the past 35 years, and I've had a very long-standing interest in children's play, even before there were video games to speak of. This is going all the way back into the 1970s when Pong was initially introduced. In my education, I worked with the foremost developmental psychologist, Dr. David Elkind, who talked about how play was the same thing as learning for kids. And as I began my clinical work and working with kids with ADHD, I began to find how much these kids loved video games and how much they loved technology, but that they demonstrate a very different set of behaviors when they play video games compared to at school. They were more attentive, persistent, flexible. They were willing to overcome frustration. They were motivated. They were learning to master games, many things that they weren't doing in school. So I began to ask questions way back in the 1970s about could we use some of these technologies, and particularly as I became a professional in the 1990s, as to whether we could use these types of video games and tools and technologies to help these kids. So what I'm hoping that you'll get from today is that you'll begin to understand a little bit about how much kids with ADHD are engaged with video games, hear a little bit about the positive and negative research about this, and then start to think a little bit about why video games might be a useful tool for teaching kids and helping kids with ADHD. And then the probably most interesting part of this is looking at some of the new digital therapeutics, digital medicines, and apps that are actually now being designed for kids with ADHD, many of them which are really focused on the video game piece of the component. And then thinking a little bit about how we might use these games and technologies and finding the right kids to use them with. So, how much kids with ADHD use popular video games? Well, if you ask parents or if you ask clinicians, they'll probably tell you a lot more than other kids. And that certainly feels as if that's the case when kids come into my office. However, most of the research suggests that for the most part, kids with ADHD are playing video games about the same amount of time as their peers. Some recent research suggests that while most kids with ADHD are very similar to their typically developing peers, there's a small group of kids, maybe 20% of them, who really are overly involved in video games and playing more intensely and doing more than they really should. We did a little bit of research ourselves in my offices and with my LearningWorks for Kids project, and what we found is that kids with ADHD tended to be a little bit more interested in video games than their peers who were interested in music, for example. So we saw a little bit of a difference in our own data with that. So how do they perform on video games? Well, again, the older research suggested that actually kids with ADHD didn't actually perform as well on a lot of more complex video games where they needed to utilize different sort of strategies or executive functioning skills as their peers did. They didn't apply those skills as readily to the game, but because they stuck with it, they became just as good as with the kids. However, there's also been some very compelling data that suggests that kids with ADHD tend to perform better on video game-like academic tasks. In fact, just recently I was working with a family who has a child who has dyslexia and ADHD, and the parents said to me that this child focused far more on some of the video game-like or app-like tools for dyslexia than they had in traditional teaching, and they were really pleased and wanted to use those kinds of tools. Well, there are a number of concerns, and in fact, oftentimes when parents come to me in my office, or if I'm doing presentations and they're speaking to me, they'll say, well, I'm concerned that my kid with ADHD will just want to play video games all the time. And there's some pretty compelling data that suggests that people with ADHD tend to have more addictive qualities to begin with, whether that be with video games or alcohol or gambling or other kinds of things. So we have some legitimate reasons for concerns about that. And what we've seen in some of the data is that kids with ADHD are far more reluctant to stop playing video games than their peers. They have difficulties with the transition piece for sure. And there are kids with ADHD who, if they spend more than an hour or so a day, may display signs of more short-term attention. So what else do we know about video games and kids with ADHD? Well, some of the more recent research suggests that increased time throughout childhood is associated with more ADHD at the age of 22. Now, that's a correlational study. It doesn't necessarily tell us that playing video games cause ADHD. In fact, when parents ask, do video games cause ADHD, it's pretty easy to say no. However, can kids with ADHD tend to spend more time playing video games and therefore have a number of other difficulties? Absolutely. But we do see that with these kids, again, that there tends to be a little bit more tendencies towards compulsive or addictive or problematic use of games and technology. So this is something to really pay attention to. Now, let's talk a little bit about why video games could be useful, because video games and learning makes sense. I mean, kids learn from their play. And if you leave this presentation with anything, the thing I would like you to hear is that we know that children learn from their play. 20 or 30 years ago, we said video games, well, that's not really play. Well, it is play, and I call it digital play, and it's one of the most important types of play for kids. So they learn from their play. They're creative when they're playing, say, using YouTube or making a TikTok, okay? When they play video games, and I'm not talking just about the academics here. They share, they cooperate, they communicate. The Harvard Business Review did a study that found that kids who played World of Warcraft were much better leaders in the real world. So there's lots of reasons. We see surgeons who who play video games are much better in laparoscopic surgery. Lots of ways that they learn. And one of the ways that I'm most interested in that they learn is on executive functioning skills. So for those of you who are unsure about what we mean by executive functioning skills, we think about them as being brain-based cognitive skills that help with decision-making and self-control. And for many of the thought leaders in the field of ADHD, they essentially equate executive functioning difficulties in ADHD. So rather than talk about ADHD as hyperactivity and inattention, they say it's about disorganization, it's about problems with time management, it's about problems with flexibility, with emotional and behavioral regulation. And what we can see, and this is part of what I've been working on for many, many years, is identifying games and apps that either practice these skills, and some of the more complex games practice these skills all the time. You have to use planning skills. You have to be flexible. You have to manage your time to be successful in video games. So many games actually practice these executive functioning skills. And what we've seen in some of the research suggests that it can increase processing speed. It can help with selective attention just by playing the games. And now we're actually developing in some of our digital therapeutics methods of using some of that in-game technology and what kids are actually doing in the game to improve brain functioning that can help in that regard. So if we look at this from a different perspective, we might ask, well, how should we treat kids with ADHD? Let's forget about video games for a little bit. How should we treat kids with ADHD? Well, the data is pretty compelling. Okay, we know that the best way to treat them behaviorally is a point of performance intervention. Have a reward or a consequence immediately. Okay, repetition and practice is important for them. Kind of meeting the child's individual needs are important for them. Multimodal opportunities for feedback can be very useful. And when we're teaching these kids, we want to use a variety of strategic teaching principles so that they understand what the goals are. They can utilize metacognition to be able to think about what they're doing. So the kinds of things that we want to do when we're developing basic behavioral interventions with kids with ADHD are very similar to what we actually do when kids play video games. So this is a chart here that tells us a little bit. I've got a couple of these charts that tell us why we would use video games and digital media to help kids with ADHD. So one of the things that kids with ADHD struggle with is following directions. Well, video games teach by trial and error. And in fact, you'll see that kids can follow the directions because they'll go back and kind of keep working on it. One of the things that is really important for kids with ADHD when it comes to school and learning is that they get frustrated. They're struggling with stuff. They're not attending to things. They may not have a learning disability, but because they didn't follow or hear the directions, or they got distracted, they fall behind and then they get in trouble, or they get the teachers calling them. Well, in video games, what happens is the negative feedback is private, so they continue and they keep working at things. So they're not bothered as much. Those self-esteem issues that happen with kids with video games, in school don't happen in video games because they can keep practicing. And they oftentimes really choose to persist and kind of continue working on these things. So video games kind of provide them with a model for if you work hard at something and you sustain your attention, you will be able to do well with it. So why do we want to think about this? I mean, well, one of the things that we know about video games is that kids will focus and attend. They sustain their focus, their attention. They're engaged. They're persistent. And that's a wonderful reason to use that as a tool. If you have a great teacher in a classroom, for example, and the teacher can engage the kids, get the kids to be attentive, get the kids to persist, they're willing to overcome frustration, the kids are far more likely to learn. And this is one of the things that becomes important in using video games as a tool for helping kids with ADHD. They're a perfect tool for kind of capturing the kids' attention and then getting them to learn something. So there's also another part to this. I call this the emotions and biology of why kids love technology. But one of the things that differentiates kids' experiences with video games versus learning in the classroom or other kinds of things is that they really are attentive to it. And you know what? Most kids with ADHD love when they can focus and attend to something. So one of the tools that I frequently talk about with kids who have ADHD that they seem to love to do, and I can't say this is true for everybody, but it's a pretty good generalization, is playing with Legos, for example. So kids can play with Legos. They're getting immediate feedback. They can change what they're doing without any reason for beating themselves up for doing something poorly. They can just fix it and be flexible, and they can do it for hours, and they love doing it. Kids with ADHD love doing things that keep them focused. One of the things that I also notice is that a lot of kids with ADHD like doing sort of risky, dangerous things. So oftentimes I'll suggest to parents, well, you know, video games is one thing that'll keep your kid focused. How about finding them some dangerous sports, some skateboarding or rock climbing or other kinds of things that have a little bit of a danger where you really need to focus and attend, because the kids with ADHD like that. And they're engaged. They have a sense of flow, where they're fully engaged and immersed in the experience. So this is one of the reasons. And from a biological standpoint, what we see when they play video games is it creates a dopamine rush. So how should we use technology to help kids with ADHD? Well, I would say let's be a little bit cautious, okay? Just because a kid is attentive to the video game doesn't mean that it's helpful to them. And some kids may be very attentive to certain video games that might help them a little bit, but too much of the same thing isn't going to really help them either. And the same thing I would say about educational technologies for kids with ADHD is you got to make sure that they're engaging and interested in them, because if they're not, it's not going to be helpful for the kids. Now, one of the things that we're going to be moving into very soon is, and we already have some of it, our virtual reality treatments for kids with ADHD. That's going to be a whole other area of fascination where we're going to be able to see great gains, because we can make real world situations that are similar to the kinds of situations that kids with ADHD need to address. And the other reason to use technology to treat ADHD is because we don't really have a choice. The technology is everywhere. More and more kids are going to be wearing different kinds of watches. There are some really cool technologies. One of them called Revive, which is a watch that is kind of giving kids signals around what they should do. And it's really designed for kids with ADHD. And they're really developing some very cool tools with that. So, you know, the technology, it's everywhere. It's, you know, on their phone. I mean, kids, you know, especially for older kids, they're going to have their phones with them. About between 75 and 90% of teenagers have their cell phones within arm's reach 24 hours a day. So this technology is everywhere. We need to use it with kids. So what are these new digital therapeutics, digital medicine? What do we mean by that? So this is a little bit of a different sort of approach now. So digital therapeutics are really more medical interventions using evidence-based prescriptive tools, okay, that in the United States have sought government approval, the Food and Drug Administration. Digital medicine is kind of a broader field where we're using technologies for measurement and intervention. Digital health is sort of how can we use kind of existing apps and communication technologies to manage illnesses or to promote wellness. So this is more of a wellness sort of thing. A lot of the brain training tools that are out there like that. And then apps and games, both consumer direct and popular games that can be used to help with learning, skill development, problem solving, personal growth. So we have a lot of different approaches with this where video games are part of this. So what we're going to do is look at a couple of these that are being used now that I think are really kind of interesting and useful. So one of the things that we look at is what are the characteristics of these things? Most of them are really pretty good at trying to get evidence. Some of them have done incredible research. Some of them have done random controlled trials with hundreds and hundreds of kids. Most of these tools are targeting specific brain functions or specific strategies, specific areas. They're not kind of saying we get rid of ADHD. Most of them talk about they're just an adjunctive tool. They're going to be used in combination, sometimes with medication, sometimes with behavioral treatments. So that's one of the things I think that defines these, and the ones, and it certainly make me comfortable in advocating for this, because the companies that are starting to do this now are really starting to say, hey, here's another tool to help kids with ADHD. And by the way, just because we say someone has ADHD, that doesn't mean they're all alike. Everybody with ADHD is quite different. All right, so let's take a look at some of these. The first one we're going to look at is MyDear.
MyDear helps children ages 6 to 12 who struggle with their emotions. MyDear was developed by clinicians from Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, and is designed to create a fun and engaging way for kids to practice emotional regulation through play. Children wear a heart rate monitor while they play, which allows them to see their emotions and connect with them directly. As they play, kids react to their heart rate. The games get more difficult as the player's heart rate increases. Kids practice how to bring their heart rate down through deep breathing or taking a pause in order to earn rewards in the games. Over time and with continuous practice, the cooldowns or pauses will become automatic even when your child faces real-world challenges. After you set up your account, you'll be able to see your child's progress, set goals, connect with other members of the community, and find fun, interactive ways to work through challenges.
Okay, so Mightier is for kids, and most of these are really for kids that are a little bit younger, ages 8 to 12. What I like about Mightier is when they developed this tool, they had real game developers be a part of it this right from the get-go. And they keep adding more and more games to keep the kids engaged and interested. We're doing some research on this in our office, which is really cool. We're getting great feedback from the parents. And they're also telling us that the kids are learning how to regulate their emotions outside of this. Now, Mightier is a little bit focused more on emotional regulation, frustration, handling stress, and to a lesser degree, I think, hyperactivity and inattention. This is a little bit about how it works, and it's really teaching these kids these breathing and relaxation techniques. All right, let's go to the next one. And this is June. It's a different kind of app.
Welcome to June. June is a magical world for you to explore with your very own pet called a doter. Start your adventure by first choosing one of 3 doters, Amborn, Ferox, or Polaire. Then, complete tasks assigned to you in real life called quests in order to care for your doter and start exploring June. Along the way, you can unlock secret rewards for your doter, hidden mini-games, and much, much more. There are so many regions to explore, items to collect, and friends to make. So, what are you waiting for? Let's start your adventure now. Welcome.
Okay, so what is it? So June is essentially an app, again, developed by game makers. The people who are making these tools are people who are gamers by nature. They understand what kinds of games and what will attract kids' attention and focus. And essentially, there's 2 components. There's a parent component where the parents develop a routine, expectations to follow that the kids need to do, and then the kids have to look at their phone or their parents' phone. And by complying and completing these tasks, they earn points to allow them to play the game where they have the doter and those kinds of things, so that and the game is really kind of engaging, and it circles through a bunch of areas. Again, we're doing some research on this in our office. We're finding that parents are really interested in this because it's really focused on getting kids to sort of follow through. One of the biggest things that we hear from parents of kids with ADHD is they can't follow routines. They forget what they're supposed to do every morning. They have difficulty with some working memory issues. They need reminders around their homework. One of the things that the folks at June have told us is that they see that parents report that they're nagging their kids less because the kids are able to do this within the game. So it's at this point, I think it's a really cool app. It's simple to use, and you can get it right on your phone. Next one is EndeavorRx. Okay, and I'm hoping that
Imagine a medicine made up of pixels and play. Created with cognitive science and proven in clinical studies. A video game that invites your child to discover new worlds. Build their universe. Capture mystic creatures. Boost past challenges. And unlock new characters. Oh, yeah. All to create positive change. Introducing EndeavorRx, the first prescription ADHD therapy. Look at us, rocking it again. Delivered through a video game experience. Designed to work alongside your treatment plan.
So EndeavorRx, again, developed with gamers involved. As you can see, as you watch the video, the graphics are really cool. we were using it in our office with a number of my undergraduate and graduate students, and they were having a blast playing. It's hard. It's really hard to do, and that's part of how it works. Is that we're kind of getting to it has an algorithm that allows it to get harder and harder, and it's focused on specific aspects of the brain. And what happens is, as kids increase and improve, it gets harder and harder, and there's some frustration that can occur with the kids, but the frustration is really how they learn. It's sort of no gain, no pain, no gain, if you will. This is really more designed for kids with ADHD inattentive and ADHD combined type. It focuses on selective and sustained attention. It works through this proprietary platform that engages specific cognitive networks. And as I said, it's really pretty engaging and fun. All right, the last one I'm going to show you is what I'm most familiar with. It's LearningWorks for Kids.
LearningWorks for Kids classes are designed to help kids learn about and practice thinking skills they use every day at home, at school, and in video games. We'll start each class with a video about the thinking skill we're focusing on, and then get some hands-on experience practicing that skill in-game.
Oh, so when it changes color, you gotta stop. So I go. Now you go.
Because kids are engaged in the games they enjoy, practicing these skills while playing can help them improve their gameplay, but also help them at school and at home. We apply evidence-based strategic teaching principles and the LearningWorks for Kids model of detect, reflect, and connect to make gameplay digitally nutritious.
So LearningWorks for Kids is the company that I developed many years ago, and we essentially just started by helping parents identify games and technologies and apps on a website that might practice these executive functioning skills or support them. So for example, an app such as a calendar app can support kids who have weak time management skills or weak organizational skills. So essentially it was a teaching website for parents, kids, clinicians, educators to do. And now we actually do some of this on our own by teaching kids in live classes, as well as in having them follow self-guided classes on our lw4k.com website. So the goal here is a little bit different, is that we're using popular video games as teaching tools. Okay, the expectation, although there is data that suggests that playing certain games can improve executive function skills, the games themselves are not enough unless they're targeted in the ways that Mightier and Endeavor RX are doing. But what happens is, in this case, we utilize the metacognitive skills, the kids' capacity to identify the skills they need to work on, to think about how those skills help them in the game, and then we give them practice opportunities to apply or to generalize those skills to the real world. So that's really the focus of doing this. It's really on looking at improving executive functioning and social emotional learning skills. So I'm going to give you a couple of other things here. These are some additional tools for finding games with kids with ADHD that you can look at. This is my book that's really about the same types of stuff. It's written all about using games to improve executive function skills with specific chapters on ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. And here is my contact information if you'd like to get a hold of me. Thank you very much.